Welcome, everybody, to the Schmoeville podcast, episode 30. My goodness. This is the official after show for all things Collider and Schmoes Know, and I am so happy to be here with you all. I'm Ryan Snelling.
And I'm Brian Davids, and I just want to say that John Rocha picked a hell of a week to quit drinking.
How do you know? I don't know. This was his birthday weekend, so he might be getting trashed right now, because I'm sure that there's an outcry from Outlaw Nation right now. I haven't seen it yet because I just finished the Schmoedown, but as far as I know, the internet's just erupting over this, right?
It's been a tough week for Mr. Rocha, as we'll get into very shortly.
Yeah, let's get into this housekeeping portion right at the top here. Before we get into corrections, though, let me just say thank you so much to everyone who we talked to the past week after we released last week's episode. I cannot believe how many views we got. It was an honor, and I'm so happy that everyone seemed to be into what we did last week. So from the bottom of my heart, again, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun reading all your comments. Most of you guys are fantastic. Some of you are a little nutty, but that's okay. Yeah, it was just nuts.
I want to echo that sentiment. I mean, again, thank you, people. I mean, they tripled our audience, Snelling.
Yeah, and a lot of those people, hopefully, obviously, it was maybe their first time giving us a shot. So we hope that if you tested the waters last week, that you're back here again this week. I don't know if this show is going to be as big, and I feel like I say that every week. This week I have an obligation, and I was planning on having a short show. But usually when I say that it's going to be a short show, it ends up being exactly as long as every other episode. I'm ready to get into the more housekeeping stuff, and this might turn into Brian's clarification corner. We'll see what you have to say here. I know you've got some stuff.
You want me to start with a couple?
You could. Sure, certainly.
Well, I want to clarify something that I mentioned last week, is I did not mean to imply that Team ETC, who were branded as Machinima at the time, I didn't mean to say that they beat Manson Malone at the time via a knockout. Since we have new knockout terminology established in the Ultimate Schmoedown press conference this week, I just want to make that clear. However, while I remember the match coming down to the final Jeopardy round, the old format, I didn't remember it being as close as it was. So I just wanted to issue that correction. And yes, Snelling, Greg was joking when he said color of money might be a possible answer.
No, he wasn't.
During their multiple choice steal. Your nitpicking of the most insignificant moment of that tag team match, as well as its omission from our show outline, led to a rare mistake on my part, and then right after that, I asked you to remind me who Rotten Tomatoes played, and you gave me the wrong answer when it was Team Top 10, not Mega Powers. So you get the shame sandwich this week.
You know what? I don't feel ashamed. I'm not embarrassed. Whatever. You can call me out, correct me. That's what the comment section's for. Go nuts, everybody. I'm not perfect. I'm not going to apologize either.
Do you have any corrections yourself?
No, that's actually what I was going to bring up, is that I was just wrong last week, but you did that for me, so I appreciate it.
Well, I've got one more thing that I want to follow up on, and that is our Ash versus Evil Dead after show discussion from last week, and that probably means that I was right. So I did some research, and like I said I would check stars to see if they were promoting the Collider after show after Ash, after each episode of Ash versus the Evil Dead or Evil Dead. And they are not promoting the Collider after show after each episode.
Bullshit.
And so that's kind of strange, obviously. I mean, why make this agreement if you're not going to promote it? And I looked into the numbers, though. I really wanted to see if Clark and company are getting the numbers that they should be getting, even though Stars does not promote the after show. And I also compared those numbers to Rebels as well as Campia's old Arrow after show. And it was basically like I said last week, that the viewership basically dictates what the after show views are getting. So for example, during Campia's last season of doing the Arrow after show, this was season 3, Arrow was getting the CW's biggest ratings ever. And so his after show, which had moved to Stream TV at the time, that premiered with 150,000 viewers. On average, John was getting about 70,000 people before he quit watching the show mid-season. Stephen Amell had just come on the show. That episode got like 190,000 viewers, and yet John still quit mid-season. But that shows you just how many people were watching Arrow at the time. And even once Campea quit the Arrow after show, they were still getting 30,000 people on average. So that kind of shows you the audience that Campea brings, but also the audience that without Campea, they can still put up 30,000 with the number of people that were watching Arrow at the time. All in all, John got about 2% of Arrow's audience, which was about 3.5 million people per episode on average. Moving to Rebels, which is the after show that Kristian runs, when you factor their delayed viewing, they get about 1.2 million per episode. They get about 800,000 live. And when you factor 40,000 viewers for Jedi Council's after show, I forget the name of it, but when you factor that amount, Kristian is getting 3% of that audience. So in some cases, they can put up 130,000 for Jedi Council just for that show. So those viewership numbers make sense, like the Arrow after show's viewership made sense. When it comes to Ash vs. Evil Dead, the ratings are much lower for that show compared to Rebels or Arrow. They get about 300,000 viewers per episode live. So that's a far cry from these other two shows. And when you factor Nightmares has much smaller audience than what Campea had at the time, than what Jedi Council has, you would think that the Ash After Show would be much less, but they average about 11,000 per episode so far, and that's actually 3.5% of the Ash vs. Evil Dead audience. So even though they get less views per episode than the Rebels After Show or Campea's old Arrow After Show, Clark is still doing very well in terms of the percentage of the audience. So as I said last week, the bottom line is the viewership is relative to what the after shows are able to get, which is 2 to 3.5%.
But let's talk about the bullshit, which is being the official after show as deemed by Stars and having no advantages to that at all. So Collider's show could be on Stars if they wanted to set that up. That might be a little bit more technical or whatever, but if they wanted to, they could actually air the after show on Stars. But I guess they're sort of going the other route that Mr. Robot did, which is they put the after show on the Verge's website, which is fine. I understand that too. But so if Stars is not promoting that show, then what's the point of making it the official after show? Yes, I was excited. This is exactly what I wanted for them, but it kind of sounds like Stars they're being assholes about it. And the only thing that's been a plus is that they had Lucy Lawless in studio, I believe. But
they had another guest from the show as well.
Okay. But they could have done that anyway. I mean, Nightmares, more than anybody, I would say, Nightmares has the most guests throughout the week because, you know, they insert those extra little videos, their interviews with the people of interest in that genre. Nightmares does that a lot. So that's sort of something that they could have done anyway. So what's the point, really? So I'm a little bummed that it's not going the way that we originally thought for them. Because even though I don't watch Nightmares consistently, that still sucks ass for the people involved.
Here's the motivation on Stars' part. Like I said, Ash vs. Evil Dead gets 300,000 viewers per episode on average. So this show is not making bank for the network, but they've got a nice little audience that, relative to their other shows, it's worth keeping on the air. Thus, it's not worth it for them to rent out their own studio space and cast their own people because the show doesn't bring in enough revenue for that. So it's more cost effective to reach out to someone like Collider Nightmares to have their infrastructure function as their after show. They've got talented people like Perry and Clark and Riley, etc. So it just, I can't forget Schnepp, of course. So it just makes sense for a network that does not want to overly invest to kind of take this route for now.
I mean, yeah, that's not even my biggest problem. The fact that they're not recording in a Starz studio. It's just the fact that I feel like they're being, I don't know if mistreated is the word, but it was just an empty promise. I feel like they're not giving it the attention it deserves. I mean, what are we on? Like episode 4? Ash vs. Evil Dead just started their second season, so I don't know, a couple months ago, they thought it was big enough or important enough to require an after show, period. So I feel like they wanted an after show, but they were just being pretty shitty about it to them.
I checked on demand just to double check, and there's no mention on that either when they do the end of the episode type things. And I checked the iTunes rankings as well. There is no audio feed to my knowledge of After Ash. And so when you type in Ash vs. Evil Dead in iTunes, this show does not show up in those rankings either. And if you're the official after show for this show, that's kind of the big advantage that you would get in iTunes, is having that distinction when people are surveying the number of options that are out there. So if they're up there in iTunes right now, which they're not, people would choose them over the other options. But since they're not there, they have to, people are going to check out the other options.
Yeah.
So they are missing out on more people by not having Stars push the show on Stars itself, as well as not having the audio feed in iTunes.
Yeah. Well, I just think the situation's really unfortunate. And again, this isn't content that I watch, but I know it's got to suck for Riley and Clark, especially over there. So I hope that they don't give up on this idea because of this bad situation with Stars. I hope another opportunity is presented. They can do another show. The Rebels seems to be doing very well, so I hope they don't give up on this and it doesn't give them a bad taste in their mouth. Are you done? Are we done with sort of the housekeeping stuff? Are you ready to get into the big topics in Collider?
Yeah, so let's not bury the lead, Snelling.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago on this very show, I made a wish. A wish that I'd like you, Snelling, to cut into this segment right here. Will you? Who knows?
Probably not.
The point is, I put my wish for Ken Napzok's full-time return out into the universe. And Complex Media's Mark Fernandez heard my wish and decided to grant that wish. Mark Fernandez, you magnificent genie, you.
Yeah, didn't he call you up? Like right after we recorded that episode, he gave you a call and talked to you about it?
He asked me if it was cool. I said yes. I said, just check the tape. The podcast says all. And he made it happen.
Well, you talk to him every week, though, don't you? About
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be following my advice almost every week. I mean, I give all these suggestions, and they're following them. And that's not the only suggestion he acted on. So Ken Napzok was hired by Collider to fulfill another Swiss Army knife type role, as he'll be doing some writing for the channel. I think he'll be heavily involved in the original videos moving forward. I also think he'll be doing the news more than once per week. I bet that becomes maybe not a daily thing, but more than once per week like it is now on the live show. What do you think of that, first off? Do you think that is a possibility?
I think anything is possible, to quote Kevin Garnett. I mean, I've just thought of so many things after they made this announcement, and I'm sure we might talk a little bit more about it later on when we talk about the live show as well, but since this is headline news, we have to start with this. I think that Ken said it perfectly. He just said a lot of things are coming, and they're probably going to be big changes. Kristian even made the point on the Schmoeville Facebook page. Someone questioned how they didn't like the Schmoes Know live show and everything at Collider changing all the time. And Kristian just made it a point. Look, change means that we're growing. And I could not agree more with him. And the fact that right after the Johns and right after Cobster and now this, it's like they are throwing out so much buck. Ken is probably going to come on and do some sketch stuff.
More stuff like the JTE special. That's why you bring in a Ken Napzok, to have that type of dynamic. Of course, he's going to be the face of their Game of Thrones coverage, which is significant because he brings a depth of knowledge that rivals mine when it comes to Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Of course, he'll guest on Jedi Council whenever Tiffany or Ellis are off fulfilling their other priorities, which means he'll be on every week. And for the record, he's still doing Force Center at Screen Junkies. So he's still going to be doing a couple things over there at Screen Junkies. But He's ours. He is now ours.
Yeah.
And like you said, given all of the recent hires and investments being made by Mark Fernandez, such as Jeremy Johns' six-figure salary, there do appear to be some casualties in the process. Should we get to the casualties, or do you want to keep talking about what Napzok brings to the mix?
We can talk about the casualties. Absolutely.
Well, something had to go to bring on all of these new additions, be it Jeremy Johns and his six-figure salary, Ken Napzok, as well as Copster in a full-time role for Schmoes.
And this has you written all over it, by the way, because what do you say weekly on this podcast? You don't care about Top 10 show.
The Top 10 show never worked for me. And just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean I don't understand why it didn't work for other people. But the fact that it's now on hiatus, potentially being canceled, is no surprise to me. And of course, it just so happens to happen in the same week of Ken's hire, as well as the return of the Walking Dead recap show. So none of that is an accident. None of that is an accident.
Do you think it's because people never could figure out what punting was? Is that why they're on hiatus?
There was no engagement. Like I said, there was no way to engage as a listener, as a viewer. It's a good podcast. I'm not taking anything away from the host, but when it comes to a show on Collider Video, it needs to do something, not just in terms of numbers, but as far as engagement. And I never really felt like it reached a level that went beyond its existing fans. The ratings started off around 30,000 per episode, and its superhero top 10 got around 46,000, as you'd expect with the Collider brand. But the last month, their numbers have dipped to around 20,000, so it wasn't setting the world on fire. And that's when you can really tell after a few months whether a show is really going to last, because you get some initial push up front, you get some buzz up front, but what happens 3 months, 4 months down the road is really the key. And it just didn't really seem to have any staying power. And like I said, if you have fans engaging like they engage with the 7fave hashtag, if you find a way to incorporate that engagement into that show, perhaps there's a way they can bring it back in a more successful fashion. But I'm not surprised by this. You?
Look, I've watched Top 10 every week. I watched or listened to Top 10 even before it was a Collider show. So the positive spin I'll put on this is that I did see people upset about the cancellation. People, or I should say hiatus, even though I think it's an obvious cancellation. The word that they used is hiatus. Now, what I will say to Rocha and Nost is that they want people to tweet out at Collider and let them know that they're going to miss the show, that it's a mistake that they're putting it on hiatus. However, Rocha and Nost should still keep doing the show via podcast form. I don't know if Kristian will let them continue to put it on the YouTube channel, but it doesn't have to be over completely. That's one thing that they can do. And then if the numbers go up, because I'm sure there were plenty of people that had never heard of the Top 10 show before it aired on Collider. So keep those fans engaged and maybe try different things on the podcast form. And if that grows, then maybe you can come back. So
we should compare its audio numbers on the SK podcast channel to its viewership numbers on the Collider channel, just to see how much it truly grew.
Definitely. So I do want to say that if Kristian's listening or whoever, have them continue the show in podcast form in some way, and then see what that does. Maybe put it on the Schmoes Know podcast feed and then look at the numbers there. So
do they want to? Don't you think it's weird that they did not automatically say, don't worry, folks, we're going to keep it going in audio format? Do they feel like, are they dejected? Are they despondent to where they don't want to keep doing it, which is why they didn't say, don't worry, we're going to keep it going in audio format? Is this kind of a fatal blow to their spirits in terms of keeping it going in some format? I
guess that would play into why we think it's being put on hiatus in the first place.
It seems like the lack of endorsement by Collider at this point has them questioning whether they want to do the show at all in any format. So they're probably going to take some time off, think about it, see where things kind of end up, and figure out if they want to keep doing this show long term. But I would be crushed, personally, if my show made the Collider video feed only to be canceled about 3-4 months later. I would be crushed. I don't know if I would keep doing a show that did not make it on that platform. I would kind of feel like it was a failure. It's not a failure, but it did not achieve the level of success that they had hoped. And I know Rocha's a prideful guy, as is Nost, and I can see them potentially wanting to try something else that does succeed in a way that Collider Video would never want to cancel a show that they're doing.
Yeah, and that's sort of the language that they use, that, again, it's on hiatus and it's going to come back in some form or another later on. What's interesting about that is they had a 4-week break that we just found out about. Like, they could have been developing the Top 10 show and what it might become over those 4 weeks, but they clearly need more time. That's why I think it's actually a cancellation. But I don't know, man. Look, I like the idea of the Top 10 show and what it represents, okay? I don't want Collider to be afraid to put out shows like this, because I actually think that they do help the growth, and I love the widespread, the different types of content that Collider is putting out there. I think it's great. Now, look, Top 10 could have just been a stepping stone to something else that will be even bigger and better. And then we won't really think of, at least in my eyes, we won't think of Top 10 as a failure. So it sucks. It's unfortunate. I don't know if I know you don't. I don't think I'm going to miss it very much either. Like, if it comes back on, then I'll watch it. But I'm really not hurting over this at the same time, just because the sun is rising, in my opinion. Like, overall, just looking at Collider with all the other things that are happening, it just looks like we're going on to bigger and better things. So I enjoyed the Top 10 show. Again, I don't want it to see it go away completely. Put it in the podcast form. That way I can still listen to it. But let's make Collider as good as it can be, as great as it can be.
I think there's a future for the Top 10 show, just not on the Collider network. I don't think it ever truly fit with where they're going, and financially it makes sense why they would do this. They've got a lot of new people coming on board. They've got their Walking Dead after show coming back, which Rocha will be a part of, so he does get to keep busy in that sense. But I just never understood why I should care about two guys and their top 10 lists for random categories. It seems, I don't want to say presumptuous, for them to kind of decide what these top 10s are without me, the viewer, having some sort of say.
Right.
And RB3, he was quite fond of my idea, which you did not like as a top 10 truther, which was, again, to encourage audience engagement, like we saw with the 7fave hashtag. I've never seen a hashtag drive so many people to want to make a list.
Yeah.
Since I've joined Twitter. That was insane. They made a whole topic about it for the Schmoes Know show. They made a whole topic for the actual discussion with your buddy Chad Michael Collins. Tricks, I don't have any tricks. So I want to be compelled to make my own list. I want someone to compel me to make my own list every single week, no matter what the topic is. And that way I can then compare it to those guys, to their lists. And then add all those up to form the audience list so that we can compare the audience list to the show's list. That engages people far more than being told what the top 10 is from two different guys.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just my own thing. And I guess I agree with the people that are upset that the show is leaving. It's that I just saw it more as an education, some films that I need to pay attention to. I just thought it was a movie discussion show, and I didn't really take that top 10 thing way too seriously. The engagement part.
But that's what the show is, though. It's making a top 10 list. That's what the whole objective is, to rank these films. And I know you got education out of it, but the objective still was to rank these things. Did they listen to this show? Did they hear my idea?
No.
To get an audience list, to get engagement onto the show, like we saw with the 7fave hashtag? Are they going to reboot the show with that wrinkle in it based on that success? Don't be surprised if that happens someday. Don't be surprised. Obviously, I love to toot my own horn, and give myself credit for things that, lots of other people have the same idea for. But don't be surprised if and when it does come back, if it has that dynamic to it.
Okay. Well, again, best of luck to everyone at Collider over there. Hopefully they give us something great in result of this, and then everyone will, I don't want to say it in a mean way, but hopefully we'll forget that this kind of hurts in a way at Collider. So at least for some people. So this is something that we talked about last week on TV Talk. Everyone was going nuts over Makuga's speech on Jessica Jones. Now, I talked about on the podcast that in no way did I think that Makuga was just taking the subject of rape lightly. I also didn't want it to be so serious that we were forgetting that this is still discussion of a fictional story and a fictional character. Where I was coming from was I was just disappointed that him as the host of a TV talk show seemed to graze over the fact or forget a huge crucial point to this character of Jessica Jones. And that's why I was a little bit disappointed. And he was actually kind of having fun with it because he was sort of teasing an apology throughout, right? And the idea that he always has to apologize. For a long time throughout the episode, I didn't think he was actually going to make the apology, and I thought he was just going to continue to make jokes, but he eventually did. So how did you feel about the apology?
It was a little disingenuous. I thought he was basically forced into doing this apology. Like, he did not want to do it, but he was asked to do it. I said last week that I hope he apologizes for what he said, and it just looked like he was doing it with a bit of force behind it, with a bit of coercion. And so his body language, if you look at his body language, is kind of like, whatever. Like, I just meant it was a flat performance. It was a one-note performance. Then SPR jumped in and blamed Kristen Ritter, which isn't fair because Kristen Ritter is a fantastic actress. And so I'm glad he apologized, but at the same time, it was not the most genuine of apologies. And I'm not just saying that because I give Josh a hard time on a regular basis. If you just look at his body language, you could tell that he did not really want to give it, but he felt that he had to. So what was your read on the situation?
Did you just somewhat criticize or take issue with something that Sasha Pearl Raver did?
A little bit, yeah. A little bit, because she blamed Kristen Ritter's performance when Kristen Ritter is a phenomenal actress, as we've seen over the years, especially season 2 of Breaking Bad.
Yeah, that's nothing. Like, I don't see how it has anything to do with Chris. She was playing that role, and she did a great job on it. So I'm not really sure why. I've never heard anyone take issue with her performance. So
he's apologized, but I know some people that were very upset with what he said last week in terms of the original comments, and they were not at all pleased with his apology. Some are even telling me that they're no longer going to watch TV Talk because his apology was so disingenuous.
Okay.
That was their words, not mine.
I know. That's too much. The thing that I took away from that apology, though, is David Griffin sort of brought it up too, where he wants people to understand that they don't have to like everything when it comes to television. And to quote Makuga, he said that the TV talk show can't just be flowers, flowers, flowers. Okay? Like, they're going to be real. They're going to talk about their honest opinion, but people don't have to get offended by it. And that's sort of what I was talking about with this show. Comparing it to Schmoeville. They don't have to like everything we say, but they also don't have to take offense to everything we say. And what Makuga said about TV Talk is sort of the exact same attitude that I have about Schmoeville. And so I actually appreciated that, and I understand that point. So I'm sure that Makuga understands that what he said was dumb, but at the same time, people are getting so riled up, it makes them want to apologize less, if that makes sense.
Right.
So maybe that's why the body language was there, because he was just like, here's another thing that people called me out on. They can't just let it go. They know I'm a human and I mess up things sometimes. And I don't know. I can understand why someone would just hate having to apologize for every single little thing. Now, I'll defend Makuga a little bit, but there are plenty of things that he should apologize for, and plenty of things that he does are stupid, but hey, a lot of people do that. But with this particular thing, it was something to bring up for sure. It was dumb for him to say it because he is the host of a TV talk show, but the reaction to it doesn't make it any better. It makes it, I don't know. There's just more of an explosion to it because so many people have to be offended by it. You know what I mean? They can't just laugh it off and be like, wow, that was dumb of him to say. They have to actually get offended, and now there's an outcry, and now people are offended to where they aren't going to watch the show. I think that's just a little too much. Like, we talked about it on the show, but there's never, like me and you, we have problems with these shows quite often, but there's never any language about me and you having to stop watching the show because of this. Like, it's just ridiculous.
No, never. Or fire this person. We've never said that.
Right. I don't like that about it. So.
But when it comes to something as serious as sexual assault, sexual abuse, issue an apology and act like you mean it, because that's a real thing that people suffer from every single day as far as the after effects of that abuse. So even if you don't agree with the fact that you have to apologize, even if that isn't what you meant, it's not that hard to just apologize and just act like you mean it. It's just a simple apology. It's not that hard to just apologize, and that way you re-endear yourself to your audience that way. Just pretend like it matters, even if it doesn't matter to you. Even if you're angry and you disagree, just apologize. There are so many people who are so stubborn about issuing an apology, just in life in general. Whether it's, a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whomever, so many people feel like that if they apologize, they're giving up control or they're giving up the upper hand. But all it takes is a simple apology to smooth over so many people, and yet some people were not satisfied with that.
So maybe this subject matter of Jessica Jones and sexual abuse, maybe that's not the greatest example of what I was trying to express. Like, I'm not saying
Right.
Makuga just should not have apologized, because I'm not saying that. But as someone like Makuga who feels like he might have to apologize, or if people are nitpicking him over and over again, which is funny because this podcast does that. But I don't know, I could see where you can call it stubbornness, but if it was any other subject matter and he said something stupid, maybe it doesn't always warrant an apology, I guess is all I'm saying. But you're right.
Like, he's probably comparing this to his British American actor point. He's probably comparing this to that, even though this is far more serious than the comments that he made about American actors should be playing American characters.
Okay.
And yet he's lumping them together, and that's why he's so frustrated.
What Halloween costumes do you want them to wear? Do you want them to wear the Defenders? Do you want them to be each other, Game of Thrones, or Stranger Things?
I voted for them to dress up as each other, and that was in the lead at 30% last time I checked.
I don't like that. I want to see them be the Defenders. Like, I want them to go all out.
Seeing David Griffin dress as Josh Makuga would be interesting. Seeing Josh Makuga dress as David Griffin would also be interesting. Seeing Sinead and Sasha do role reversal would be interesting. I don't know. I get what you're saying, but for some reason I lean towards that one. I didn't give it too much thought, to be honest, but
neither did Makuga, because before this episode, he always talks about looking like Jeffrey Dean Morgan. But when he brought up what he would dress like for The Walking Dead, he said he would clearly be Rick. And I'm like, what? You're the one who says you'd always be Negan. So I don't know why he just instantly thought he'd be Rick, even though
he just wants to be the center of attention. Rick is the star of the show. And he's got a beard because, a beard is such a rare thing these days, so...
To being the Defenders, it would take Makuga forever to decide which one he is, because they're all the main character of their own show. I could see him wrestling with that idea in his brain. This is just a quick point that I want to ask you. This sort of involves TV Talk and Top 10 in general. I've seen Rocha have a problem with Nost including documentaries in Top 10 lists, and Makuga kind of blew off... I believe it was Sasha talking about a docuseries in this week's TV Talk. So let me just ask you how you would want the topic of documentaries shown in Collider content? Like, do you think they should absolutely be in the conversation on every show, or should they have their own show? Have you noticed this issue at all?
That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it, but I don't think there's enough content to warrant its own show, but I definitely think we should be addressing documentaries and docuseries more, whether it's movie talk or TV talk. I mean, for example, I keep thinking of Hoop Dreams, that wonderful documentary from the 90s about two Chicago high school basketball players, and that should have been discussed on Movie Talk, and it would be a shame for that quality of a documentary to be overlooked. So I hope that they do give documentaries more attention in the future, regardless of which show it is.
When it came to top 10, I kind of understood, because it was Rocha that usually had the problem with it, because Nost would pick those. I can understand it there a little bit, but I'm not completely writing off the genre that is.
What was the category they were talking about?
I believe it was, the most recent one was Hitman movies, and Nost had one of his examples was a Hitman documentary about one of the greatest hitmen ever, or whatever. I don't know. Do you call it the greatest hitman ever? Some documentary, I'm forgetting the name. And Rocha just was like, hey, why don't you actually give me a...
Because they predefine what they're talking about, I would probably take issue with that, just because the context is supposed to be hitman movies, like we're used to seeing, a feature, drama, scripted, etc.
I just wanted to add that in there real quick because it was something that I noticed. I'm not writing off that genre again, because there's a movie like I watched today, 13th, by Ava DuVernay on Netflix. Like, that is something that deserves to be talked about on a channel like Collider. Now, we don't always get Sasha's indie picks anymore, and that is something that...
I was just going to say that. I miss having her on the show for that feature.
Exactly. So I think that they need to figure out another way to get independent film, which would include documentaries on there. Let me know in the comment section below if you've noticed this trend on Collider and what they should do about it, how you would like them to approach it. Because again, it's an education, and it's something that, as movie fans, we should want to support those types of films or those types of series. So just something to think about. Let's talk about it in the comment section below. Let's do that. Okay.
So let's talk about Collider Nightmares this week. I've got one obvious point up front, and that's the fact that Miri Jetikin was on the show this week. And clearly, when I said a few weeks ago not to hold your breath that she would come back to this studio anytime soon, clearly someone told her that I said that. Probably Riley. Clearly Riley told her that I said that, and so she made a point to come back as soon as possible, even though it wasn't for Schmoes Know. That being said, she's already done more promotion for her new jobs than her old one. So I'm kind of being cynical about that, just because I don't think she ever did stuff for Schmo's behalf like she's already doing for Fandemonium. And I know that she's repaying the favor to Clark. You know, she had Clark on Fandemonium, so she's now coming on to Clark's show. But I thought it was kind of strange that she's already back promoting her new gig in this studio when I don't think she ever promoted Schmoes in the same fashion. What do you think about this?
Well, I wouldn't know, only because the Schmoes Know live show was the only time I ever saw Miri. So I haven't watched an episode of Fandemonium at all, so I don't know if she ever... I guess she wouldn't have been promoting Schmoes Know if she was planning on leaving at the time. So I can definitely see what you're saying, though. I think it's funny that Riley mentioned to both of us that Miri was on the show this week to try to get us to watch it. I wanted to do that for you, Riley. I wanted to be there for you this week. But look, I thought it was very strange too, because it's like, well, you're too busy for Schmo, and maybe the difference is the Schmoes takes place on a Thursday night, a night that she could be in with her family. So that's the one big difference, I think.
How does she survive the drive there? I mean, the drive is so far. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, that afternoon traffic in LA, I'm sure it's recorded in the middle of the day, but still, that drive must have been exhausting.
Since when is horror her thing, though? Or has it always been, and I just never realized it? I thought that Nightmares was the strange pick Of all the Collider shows, I didn't expect her to be on Nightmares. So am I missing something there?
Well, again, Clark was on her show, so she's just repaying the favor to Clark by coming on to Clark's show. And she's always had a passing interest in horror. I wouldn't say she's this horror aficionado, but most of these people have just enough of an interest in most genres to get away with guesting on a particular genre show. That being said, Kristian Harloff will not be guesting on Nightmares anytime soon. That is a guy who, unlike most of these people, does not really care about horror. So for most people, though, most people are like Schnepp, where they can do double duty in certain genres if they have to. And Mary can.
That's Kristian's Pittsburgh, by the way. You guys know I'm not the horror guy. I don't like horror. Horror is not my thing. That's his Pittsburgh. But I want to talk about Nightmares mainly because I know you were happy to see Miri, though, all jokes aside. The thing about Nightmares, though, is that last week they were talking about War for the Planet of the Apes, excuse me. If people that are listening to the show don't watch Nightmares, look, I found out, and Clark even talked about this on the live show, they don't just talk about horror. They talk about several genres.
Thriller, suspense, etc.
Right. So don't be like me, where I just discounted watching Nightmares every week. I was wrong, and I will continue to watch Nightmares. I'm not going to say weekly, but I will still give it a try and keep tuning in every now and then for sure. But another correction I want to make is that I think me and you both talked about this on a previous episode of Schmoeville, where it seemed like those guys, Riley and Perry and Clark, just glorify anything that is horror. And that wasn't the case on this episode either, because Riley took issue to a couple of topics that they discussed. He wasn't really into the Universal Monsters topic that they talked about, and he didn't care for the Channel Zero premiere that came on Sci-Fi earlier this week. So
let me correct you real quick. When I made that point, I said when they are on other shows away from Nightmares, when they are on Schmoes Know or on Movie Talk, I've noticed the propensity for them to promote, champion the horror releases more than usual because they are doing Nightmares every week and they are kind of the horror spokesman for those particular movies or those particular releases. So it wasn't what they're saying on Nightmares. It's the fact that on other shows, they kind of stick their neck out a bit more for the horror releases than they normally would.
Right. Well, that's something that I hope people are understanding, because Nightmares is a show, and we looked at the numbers. The shows on the views on Nightmares aren't that much higher than what Top 10 was. So if you're upset about the Top 10 cancellation, look out for Nightmares and try to watch and try to get other people to watch. And let's make sure that we're taking care of these guys and still supporting them, because we do, despite what people think about me and you, Brian, we actually love this content. So
I'm not worried about Nightmares whatsoever. I mean, the ratings are between 40 and 50,000 on average. Again, when it's a certain topic, such as, The Conjuring 2 just coming out, they get a bigger drive of traffic. But horror is too valuable a genre right now. I mean, just look at the box office. For very little money spent per film, they put up huge return. And Collider is a genre brand. They focus on genre films for the most part. And so Collider Nightmares is very on brand. And plus, Clark is one of the few female hosts at the channel. You cannot lose her because they have so few options right now in terms of really capable hosts that can carry a show. And she's great. I've been watching Clark for a long time, and in 3 years alone, she has improved so much, and that is evident when you watch Nightmares. So that show's not going anywhere. I don't care what the ratings say. Horror is a very strong genre right now. It's so profitable. It's got a cult following, the show, if you will. They've got the official after show right now for Ash vs. the Evil Dead, and Clark is just too valuable right now to the channel. It's safe. I wouldn't worry about it.
Do you have anything on Heroes or Jedi Council?
Campea was back on Heroes. I said last week that he had not been on in a month. That's just an observation, and he is a regular cast member of that show, so that was worth pointing out, but nothing really to point out besides that. I've got a point in relation to Jedi Council that I'll save for our Schmoes Know show discussion as it pertains to a particular Twitter user that Kid Kristian called out.
Okay. Let's finish up with this new thing that they tested out this week, the Schmoedown press conference. And I assume that this was just a special occasion. They can't do this every week because I don't even know if it would hold everyone's attention. I think this was a great way to build up this particular match. They also included the addition of the TKO rule, which is the fact that if the opponent doesn't get any of their final round questions correctly, the other opponent wins automatically. What was just your general reaction to this press conference, and how did you think it was executed well?
Well, as far as the press conference goes, I brought this up last week in regards to the TKO element of the Schmoedown, and I wasn't quite sure that I had noticed it until last week that they do jump around in the final round to get a more dramatic ending when an opponent is mathematically out of it potentially, and now they've clarified that it counts as a TKO. So I like that they've addressed this and made that improvement stat-wise. As far as the press conference, I view this press conference as kind of a prototype for future variations of this. And with Ken Napzok on board as a writer, he's going to really make these things fly in terms of energy, in terms of humor, because Ken was a wrestling promoter for many years. So kind of capturing this kind of drama in this kind of environment is his forte. And you can bet your ass that he was brought on board for the Schmoedown in terms of adding his background in wrestling to kind of enhance the wrestling side of the feel to the Schmoedown. So that's another way that Ken's gonna really help things out. And of course, he's probably gonna help with Kristian's web series that Sasha was supposed to be writing that has been dying on the vine for so many months, if not years.
Yeah, we need an update on that web series. But I thought that the TKO rule was an accidental tell that we were going to get it in this match. Like, because of the fact that it's pre-recorded and they had to deal with the fact that, hey, Ellis missed all three of his questions in round 5 or whatever. Or maybe there's another one coming. Like, maybe next week we're going to have a TKO already. That's sort of how I thought about it. I was kind of worried that we were going to get a TKO almost immediately, and Kristian was like, "Hey, we actually have to introduce this real quick before it happens when we air." So that's sort of what I was expecting. Yes, Ken can definitely be utilized, and they already said that he's going to call, I believe, next week's tag match. So we're going to see Ken more involved doing that. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean,
I'm sure that was recorded 3 weeks ago, though.
Oh yeah, definitely. But then again, they also had been, talking to Napzok for a while, I assume, about the move and what the transition might be like. So,
well, he's called some matches before, though. I mean, this isn't the first time that he'll have called a match. This is just one that he happened to do a few weeks ago, and now it's the first thing he's doing. Right. Now that he's been hired in real time.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I like the idea of the press conference in general. I'm sure we'll see more once we have really big matches, the title match for sure. But again, it's not something they can sustain. I loved hearing Ellis sort of play up this baby Carrot's character and hearing Rocha yet again play up his Outlaw character and hearing them actually talk smack. Yes, if there's more writing involved, it could be a little bit stronger. That way Rocha isn't constantly just repeating himself and repeating every point that he's made in every post match ever. But
by the way, yeah, that brings up a good point, because how valuable was it to have Mark Ellis make it to the finals, because he's writing in his head all the time as a stand-up comedian. So you had great stuff that was fresh and off the cuff just because that's the way his brain thinks normally. So I love the fact that he was mocking the cowboy side of the Outlaw personality, and he kept imitating his voice and referencing steers and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. You want to talk about the Schmoeville matches then?
Before we get to the Schmoedown matches, I want to quickly acknowledge Cobster and his increased presence on the Schmoes Know feed this week. And it seems like it's been a while since we've seen Mark and Kristian do stuff together.
Yeah.
I mean, they've only done they've only done 2 movie reviews in the last 3 weeks. Jack Reacher on a Train. And neither of them love those movies. So it seems like Cobster is going to be their substitute teacher whenever one of them is busy with something else, whenever Mark is on the road. So we know that Cobster is a senior producer now on the Schmoes Know show, but now we're getting an idea of what his full-time role is going to look like on the channel itself, which is filling in to do some on-camera stuff during the week.
Yeah, Ellis mentioned, I think it was on Movie Talk, going to a press screening without Kristian, so I'm not sure what exactly is going on. I don't know if Kristian's got some more stuff that he's dealing with at home, and he hasn't been able to get out and see as many movies as Ellis has, but it's...
Well, one of those movies was the Ouija movie, the horror movie, and obviously Kristian does not make it out to see every horror film. I know that Ellis reviewed the Ouija film by himself, and so that one makes sense. But yes, Kristian has been dealing with a lot of stuff at home lately, so that's partially why they haven't been able to do as many videos together.
Right. So I'm fine with Cobster coming in on the trailer reactions, doing some stuff on Collider, maybe even doing like a Blu-ray segment, because I don't think he's done a Blu-ray in the past couple of weeks on the live show, so maybe even doing a Blu-ray segment, doing the Collider reviews. But it just sucks that, and maybe this is temporary, but it sucks that we're not getting enough Kristian and Mark on the Schmoes Know channel right now. So I don't want to say that it's because of Cobster. It's not Cobster's fault at all, so I hope to see Cobster do more stuff, but it sucks that it's at the expense of having Kristian and Mark together. So hopefully this is just temporary and we will see them back together very soon. But yeah, I mean, Cobster doing that, that's sort of a given with his new position. Same with Napzok yet again. So they're like that in that way. And I'm sure Jeremy will be the same way. So with the exception of movie reviews, because he obviously has his channel. So. Okay, let's get into the tag match. It was the Wangers versus 6 Degrees of Film.
Stacey Howard and Brianne Chandler, otherwise known as Miss Movies.
Which is important because I didn't know who these people were. And there was, I think I even mentioned to you a couple weeks ago that I had heard the name Miss Movies referenced for like 2 years. Like as long as I've been watching this content and Screen Junkies, I've heard about their friend Miss Movies. I've never had any idea who that person was this entire time until that match. And she is just delightful. I watched some film therapy this week. I'm glad to get to know her. And again, everybody should feel welcoming of all these new people. But the thing about the Wangers is that lately, because of you and because of the fans and because of the Schmoedown, I've realized that I am a horrible movie buff. I know next to nothing, and seeing someone my age and someone 6 years younger than me, 6 years younger than me, compete and do well really makes me feel horrible about myself. But what did you think of this match?
I really enjoyed this match. RB3, I could watch him for days in this competition. And I joked in the comments that if he ever catches up on Michael Bay's catalog, he's going to be unbeatable in the Schmoedown. Because on last week's Schmoes Know show, they referenced how he had not seen Armageddon. Well, it cost him a point this week, the fact that he had not seen Michael Bay's Con Air. So, like I said, if he watches Michael Bay films, he's virtually unbeatable in the Schmoedown because he knows stuff about musicals. He knows stuff about the classics. RB3 is so well-rounded for being only 19 years old. And, man, great match, though. I'm glad to see we've got some females in the house, some estrogen in the house. They are 2 of, I think, 4 or 5 women that have been in this competition. And that's just not enough. So I like their addition. What about you?
Did you see Makuga puff his chest out even further when he came out to the wheel this time?
Of course. He was looking into my soul like Kristian sometimes does. He was definitely looking at me, peering at me, and I see you, Josh McCouga. I see you.
No, I meant to the fact that he was bringing the wheel out to two girls for the first time in a long time. He's just trying to look extra muscular for the women.
No, he was mocking me, I thought. When he brought it out, I thought he was mocking me by looking at the camera in a certain way. I didn't think it was just the women.
It could be a little bit of both.
Because remember last time, the last tag team match, he was wearing his boring suit. He was being all subdued. Maybe I'm mixing up the matches, but I read it as he was sticking it to me with the way that he looked at the camera. Because he gave the camera a look. I don't know.
They finished the first round 3-2 Wangers. I was really disappointed that Copster didn't know James and the Giant Peach because, hey, we're in that generation, bro. We watched that at daycare. Come on. Wangers got musicals twice. That is unbelievable. And the final score doesn't really reflect that. I mean, they finished, 15-7? They lost by 2. I mean, they still did a pretty good job, despite the fact that they got musicals twice. So, again, that's
the score. The final score was 17. You keep saying your final score is wrong. Last week you did it, and this week you did it.
I said 15-17.
You said 15-7 when the final score was 17-15. But yeah, they passed on westerns in round 2, and they got musicals instead, which is kind of the worst case scenario when you spin the wheel, is getting musicals. But RB3 still held his own. And they were still obviously in the match. They were up 9-5 at the end of their round 2 turn. Then 6 Degrees took over, and they were it was 12-10 at the end of round 2.
It blew my mind that Copster guessed 1990 for the release of the original Terminator. When
Unbelievable.
The Terminator is so clearly an 80s movie, and I feel like it's common knowledge that T2 came out 11 years later, because that was the actual Terminator 2 was the early 90s film.
Terminator 2 was 92, I believe.
92.
So I have no idea where his head was at on that. Maybe he thought they were asking Judgment. Is that the only explanation, that he thought they were asking about Judgment Day? Could it have been such a silly mistake as that? To have such a bad guess?
I don't know why he would think that, because they clearly just said the Terminator, but maybe it was just a brain fart. But then on the other side...
I'm just trying to help the guy out. Somehow.
But on the other side, 6 Degrees didn't know the climax to Raiders of the Lost Ark. So...
The location in the Aegean Sea. They deserved to win because RB3 did not get the Con Air question right, and Copster did not get the Terminator question right. His guess was so far off. That is why 6 Degrees deserved to win. Impressive first match, of course, for the Wangers. Impressive first match for RB3 especially. They're going to be a factor in the future, but 6 Degrees deserved to win. I feel confident about that.
Yeah, me too. And I cannot wait to see more from them in the Schmoedown. More from both teams. I mean, again, I was really excited to see my boy RB3 show up because he beat me fair and square when we did our fan Schmoedown together. He is a wealth of knowledge for his age, and depending on how much longer they do the Schmoedown, he's going to be a dangerous threat in the coming years. So
just watch those Michael Bay films. Just watch those.
That's right. Maybe they'll teach those to him at USC. Let's get into the big match, which is I just finished an hour ago. It was Ellis versus Rocha, the final in the Ultimate Schmoedown tournament. We've been waiting 6 weeks for this. It is finally here. Remind everyone who you were rooting for going into the match.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not a John Rocha fan, but I predicted Rocha would win just because earlier today or yesterday, I can't remember now, when I found out the Top 10 show was canceled yesterday, I said to myself, well, there's no way he's going to lose the Schmoedown now, because there's no way they're going to dish him bad news on top of bad news. And there's just no way. There's no way they're going to beat the guy down like that in the same week that his pre-taped episode of the Ultimate Schmoedown final dishes him a loss. There's no way they're going to do that to him. And yet...
They did.
They did it. So, I mean, I have all the confidence in the world in Mark Ellis, but the fact that they made that announcement made me overthink it. I thought this would be the silver lining. I thought the win would be the silver lining in a crappy week for John Rocha. And instead, the silver lining is that he gets to host a Walking Dead recap show every Sunday.
I see how you arrived at that. I couldn't get there, though, because, again, it was in my head that they recorded the Schmoedown on a different week. And at the same time, I don't think actual, like, legitimate business of canceling the top 10 show is ever going to come at a great time. So I see what you're saying. That would have been the silver lining, and that would maybe be how the universe corrects itself and gives Rocha a bit of a luck. But I just couldn't get there.
Well, hang on a sec. The reason that it was pre-taped, the fact that it was pre-taped, is why I felt more strongly that they were canceling top 10 the same week, because they knew that the win was coming. So I thought they were purposely giving him that victory, that silver lining, in the same week. But no, they're cold. They're cold-blooded at Collider. That Mark Fernandez, he doesn't mess around.
I guess it's still a little bit ambiguous, because that goes back to the question mark I had, which was, why didn't they just make the correction to top 10 in the 4 weeks that they actually had off? So it's weird that they came back and did one final show when Nose came back from vacation, yet they came back to announce that it was over. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, I wanted Ellis to win, and
I wanted Ellis to win too. Let me get that out there. Don't mistake me here. I wanted him to win. I just thought Rocha was going to win because of XYZ. What was up with the lighting when Makuga came out?
I don't know. Like, they turned down the lights for Ellis's entrance. That way the light behind him would pop up. So, I don't know. Maybe the exposure on the camera was just too high, and they forgot to turn it down.
You know what? Josh's suit was so bright that it affected the lighting in the room. That's what it was.
That's true. Yeah. So they need to make sure that he switches up the suits. Or maybe it was because Ellis had borrowed another suit from Makuga, and the cameras couldn't handle two suits.
That's a good point. The orange suit was pretty loud. I like that Rocha brought out the baby carrots in a blender. I'm sure that was someone else's idea. I can't see him being that creative, but Josh flipped up. Did Josh flip off the Outlaw? Was that for the Outlaw or for Ellis?
Yes, he did. He flipped off the Outlaw, but he got him back later on in the show. I think Rocha yelled at Makuga during the match one time. So that's
right. But Ellis had a great strategy going into this. He said that he was going to get in the Outlaw's head. He was going to taunt him. And it kind of worked, because the Outlaw was rattled pretty early.
Yeah. I mean, Rocha reminded me, I have several friends who drive me nuts when watching sports. Like, when we'll watch UK games together, and it could be like 2 minutes into the first half, and UK could be down by 4. And I have friends that think the game is already over. That's what Rocha reminded me of in this match. Because in round 2, every other word out of his mouth was just, fuck, goddammit. And like, he had already, at that point, lost the match. And Ellis could have gotten in his head, but at the same time, he could have gotten in his own head. Because it was so early on where he was already upset with himself. I mean, and Ellis was missing stuff too. And it was a back and forth match the entire time. So, we saw a bit of anxiety from the Outlaw.
Anytime a category is said out loud, he overreacts to every category. Even if it's a strength of his, he's like, oh my God, oh God, oh God. He's panicking no matter what is announced. Let's be clear, at the end of round 1, Mark was up 5-4.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I have that correct. And
yes.
and Rocha ended on a Mike Nichols question, who directed The Graduate. So very close round 1. I'm not sure there's anything worth pointing out in round 1, but round 2, that's when a lot of stuff typically goes down. Ellis spun biopics, and he took it wisely, because that meant it would take it off the board for Rocha when he would spin, because that's Rocha's strength. Charlie Chaplin, first question. Robert Downey Jr. Ellis up 7-4. Ellis had a pretty strong command of this match. for most of the way, I felt, even if the scoreboard did not reflect that.
Well, and don't forget his Edward James Olmos guess, which finished the biopic. So he did really well. But, Rocha...
That didn't finish it. That didn't finish it because he missed the Kevin Kline as Cole Porter, which Rocha stole. Rocha then stole the Jerry Lee Lewis's cousin in Great Balls of Fire. So Rocha got a couple of those questions right as steals, but then Rocha spun comedy. Yeah. And once again, at the end of round 2, it's 10-9. It's still a close match. And then round 3, round 4, that's when Rocha kind of came undone, I think. Final Jeopardy, John Cleese, what was the name of the Enchanter character? This is something that Rocha knows. This is something that he knows. Tim versus Dennis. Ellis got it. It's his favorite movie. Rocha did not get it. They both bet 2 points. And now, to begin round 4, the speed round, Ellis is up 12-9, and the speed round kind of decided the match as far as I'm concerned. What about you?
Is it a strategy? Can you just buzz in to prevent someone from answering?
That's what I want to bring up to you. Ellis buzzed in regards to Dazed and Confused. What sport, something, Dazed and Confused. Ellis buzzed in, and he didn't have an answer. The answer was obviously baseball, but he didn't give an answer. So I feel like if you buzz in and you do not have an answer, whether it's right or wrong, I feel like your opponent should be able to steal and punish you for buzzing in without an answer. Because the fact that you buzzed just meant that you tried to prevent your opponent from answering, but you have to have something to say if you're going to get credit for buzzing in first. So I don't like that there's no steals in the speed round, especially in that scenario where Mark had nothing to say.
And remind me, so are there a finite number of questions in that round?
Five questions.
Okay.
You get one right, you get a point. You get one wrong, you lose a point. But there's no stealing in that round.
Yeah.
And I feel like they should punish people who simply buzz in to be the first person to buzz in, and then they'll think of the answer in between that time. But Ellis didn't have an answer for Dazed and Confused, and Rocha did not get to steal. I think that's total BS. I think you should be able to punish your opponent when he doesn't have an answer.
There are some
not the wrong answer when he doesn't have an answer.
Right. I don't know. Sure. But that round's tough too, because Ellis, you're thinking so much about just needing to buzz in when he did it prematurely, and that question didn't get out, and then he ultimately just didn't know the question. So, God, that round's tough.
I can't believe he got it wrong too, especially with Everybody Wants Them just coming out. Obviously, they were both linked by baseball in some loose form. It was often talked about how they weren't sequels, but it was kind of like a spiritual sequel in some way. Like kind of in the same family. And Linklater is famous for loving baseball no matter what film he makes. Boyhood, baseball. So most of his films have baseball.
Round 5 is where I thought we were getting this TKO, as I predicted. We did not get it, but it was a very interesting round because for the first time in the match, I was scared to death that Ellis was going to lose.
He was up 13-9 going into round 5, let's be clear.
And he didn't know Joe. How do you pronounce his last name? Brian. He's gonna play Deathstroke.
Manganiello.
Okay. He didn't know Joe Manganiello, and he didn't know Mr. Smee was Captain Hook's sidekick, and I was sweating at that point.
Okay, let me sound off on this for a second. I've got a lot to say about this Mr. Smee question.
Okay.
He got Mr. Smee wrong, Captain Hook's personal assistant in Disney's Peter Pan. The category was Disney. It was his 3-point question. He got the personal assistant question wrong. And Ellis, for some reason, has always had issues with Peter Pan. He said many times how much he hates the movie Hook. And if you've seen Hook, you would know that Smee is the assistant. It's ingrained in my head because of that film. And it's a classic as far as I'm concerned. But Hook is not a Disney film. I think that Ellis thought they were asking about Hook because he said how much he hates the concept of the movie they were asking about, when in actuality, they were asking about 1953's Disney film Peter Pan, not 1991's Hook. It certainly wasn't 2003's Peter Pan with Jason Isaacs as Hook, so I think Ellis confused the movies. That's why he said he hated the concept. And I've heard him sound off before how much he hates Hook. So I think his brain automatically went to Hook, and that's why he did not know the easy answer of Smee. It was a very weird moment, but I mean, Disney's Peter Pan is a classic. The old animation, the old cartoon from the 50s.
It was like he was just experiencing trauma from hating that story so much. But what's even more interesting is that right after that, it was tied 13-13, I believe, right after that. And he still looked as calm and collected as ever. He took a bite out of his baby carrots, and the look on his face, he wasn't sweating at all. I just thought that was an interesting foil to Rocha, who, was soaking wet on the other side of the table. So.
That was his strength. He's unflappable. Rocha is sweating every question, like you said. He's psyching himself out. And Ellis, I don't want to say he didn't care, because he did clarify how competitive he is, but he doesn't show it. He doesn't show any concern whatsoever, and that ends up helping him, I think. For some reason, it pays off in whatever intangible way it does, but I cannot believe that Rocha did not get the chitty chitty bang bang question right. For a guy
I knew you were going to say it.
For a guy that has so much knowledge when it comes to classic films, Caractacus Potts' Special Car. He's seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I've seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It's a classic film. I cannot believe he missed that. I can't believe he missed the Monty Python question. I can't believe he missed this. I'm shocked at the question.
More importantly, his guess was Stuart Little of all things. So that was the most upsetting thing about it. But look, I, as a massive Jason Bourne fan, am so happy that Ellis won. If he had missed that question, I don't know what I would have done. I would have broken my TV. I would have been hauling bodies out of here. But I'm so happy that Ellis won. It put him on top, 18-13, the final score, and I am just happier than ever that Ellis won this. And what's funny about this is because I was going to bring up JTE for a split second, because on the live show, I believe he chose Rocha to win because Rocha has less weaknesses than Ellis. And I wanted to clarify that when JTE was on this very podcast with you and I, he said that he was scared of Ellis because Ellis had zero weaknesses. So I just wanted to point that out, that not only was JTE going back on what he said before, but Ellis came out, showed him what's up, won the match, and I could not be happier.
See, it's hard to sort out in our heads where the tournament was at the time that JT was on our show. It's like, it's such a mind F when you think about, well, where could they have been at the tournament when JTE thought this? But David Webb was an answer that I knew instantly. I have a friend named David Webb, so it's always been ingrained in my head because of that. And strangely enough, Ellis went off on how 22 was his favorite number. It was his high school basketball number. It was his dad's number, etc. Well, 22 was my basketball number in high school. And it's also a number I pick often because of Love and Basketball, which was a popular movie at the time when I was in high school. My girlfriend and I at the time used to watch it. And she even bought me a necklace that looks just like Omar Epps' necklace in the movie, since he too wore the number 22.
I like that Taylor Swift song.
So how crazy is that?
It's pretty crazy.
22. It's a lucky number for Mark Ellis and Brian Davids. Ellis, I've said it before, he reminds me so much of my best friend. There are moments where he'll say something or laugh a certain way, and I feel like it's my good friend Ben. But regardless, I'm happy. I'm so happy about this outcome.
Well, Ellis is actually my best friend, so I hate to rub that in your face, but we're best friends.
You know, last week you were talking about the video that you did, the impromptu skit that you did on video, and you referenced how your friend Jay, whom I call Jay with an E, always kind of helps out in certain situations. He showed up as the drug dealer in that video, and I thought of this joke after we recorded last week, where I was going to say, "Oh, Jay with the E," in honor of your Jay is a drug dealer in that video.
That was really good. It was worth bringing up a week later, for sure.
I have no idea why I just did that, but J with the E.
E for ego, because that video boosted my ego, as the kids say.
As the kids say.
Let's get into...
Well, I've got something I want to go over first. So Ellis is going to face Merle in the championship at the Schmoedown Spectacular. Makuga called it the Battle in Burbank, the Collision at Collider. Rocha and Riley are going to face at the Schmoedown Spectacular. The winner becomes the #1 contender. And Rocha, after the match, this is his quote: "Everybody out there can criticize all they want. Y'all can kiss my ass. It's real shit going down here, and it's no bullshit. It really isn't. Sit behind your computers and talk all the crap you want. When you get under the lights and you really fight for this, everything comes up, and you don't know what your brain is going to come up with and not come up with." That was his closing quote. So Rocha still bringing the outlaw persona, even in defeat.
There was an issue on Twitter or Facebook, I believe, where someone mentioned Bespin and he responded so defensively against this person on Facebook. And Kristian, people were tweeting at Kristian, and Kristian tweeted, "Hey, those people that are tweeting at me about Rocha's reaction, if you don't like it, don't poke the bear." I think I completely disagree with that. Because, look, I think it's funny when Harloff responds to shitbags that clearly just come in and terrorize them, okay? The difference is this person is actually a fan, and he was bringing up Bespin. We're talking about movie trivia. It's not that serious. I know that we try to play it up and make it more serious as part of an act, but the kid was just being involved in the inside joke that all of us share, which is Rocha blew it in that match. Now, do I keep bringing up Bespin? No, it's kind of old, but that's what that person is doing, and I didn't like Rocha's response. I thought it was overly defensive for something that was not an issue at all. It was a total non-issue. And I actually don't really like Kristian's reaction to it. I just thought it was...
When was this again?
It was this past week.
This past week. So,
yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Rocha's having a bad week. His show got canceled. It's going to come out that he lost the Ultimate Schmoedown. He's got to host a Walking Dead recap show. Rocha's having the worst week ever. So I understand why he blew up at this kid. At the same time, though, come on, man. You've heard the joke enough times about Bespin to where it shouldn't affect you anymore. Shouldn't affect him anymore.
I just don't know why it actually affected him to begin with. Like, I know it's part of his persona to take it deathly seriously, but at the end of the day, we're still talking about movie trivia. Like, he didn't have to respond to that person at all. He didn't. So I just didn't really like it. I disagree. I disagree with Rocha and Kristian's side of it.
He can react that way on camera. It's fine if he reacts that way on camera. That's kind of the running joke. But to react that way to a fan, I'm not a fan of that whatsoever.
So anyway, that's just something, because when he mentioned that on the Schmoedown, even though that was probably pre-taped before this incident, since that actually took place this week, it just reminded me of that, and I didn't really like that attitude at that point. So that's just something I wanted to address. All right, I'm sorry. Continue with what you were going to say about...
Well, it's time for this week's pronunciation of the week. And yes, it's ironic, folks. It's an homage to Ken in the JTE special. I thought that would be obvious. I can't believe I have to even explain it. But because we love the Schmoelider universe and its personalities, we strive to provide constructive criticism that fine-tunes our preferred source of entertainment news. Thus, it's important that pronunciations be on point across the board, since how they pronounce something is often how most viewers go on to pronounce something in their own conversations. We debuted this segment with Rogue One's Michael Giacchino a couple weeks ago. It worked rather well. Last week, we continued it with Wonder Woman Gal Gadot, who reinforced this exact pronunciation during her press tour for Keeping Up with the Joneses this week. So for this week, we've got a doozy, as it's none other than back-to-back Oscar winner for Best Achievement in Directing. Of course, I'm talking about Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu. Iñárritu. Don't concern yourselves too much with the accent part of it, because that's a whole different can of worms when translating Spanish accents into English. Let's just focus on the phonetics. Snelling, I want you to say this with me.
Iñárritu.
Iñárritu. Iñárritu.
Iñárritu.
N-Y-A-R-E-2. Some people will say Iñárritu, some people will say Iñárritu. The bottom line is, at least you're in the ballpark depending on how you emphasize it. So, Schmoelider has been all over the place. They'll say Iñárritu, Iñárritu. They have all these crazy pronunciations. So, it's Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu. 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 N-Y-A-R. That second part is where the emphasis goes, and that's the most important part. So Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu. Iñárritu is your pronunciation of the week, aka pronunciation of the week.
Iñárritu. All right, let's get into Schmoes Know show number 255, which was all about better sequels in honor of Ouija, whatever it is, who cares, coming out this week. So we had Kristian and Ellis and Brett were back. So hooray for that. And then Clark made her official debut on the Schmoes Know show this week. So all around, great main table there. I like that a lot. And I was glad to hear about Ellis's set going so well. I wish that I could have been there in New York to see the wall-to-wall Schmoes Know fans, to see that Q&A between him and Schnapp, and then, of course, most importantly, the hour-long set. That sounded like a dream come true. So I'm so jealous of you all if you're listening to this and you got to see him do that. But
this is Clark's first time hosting. She's been loosely tied to the Schmoes before because she was on a now deceased after hours show, which is something that they've done twice, where it's a show that kind of went up later in the evening. They would do a kind of a 2, maybe 3 hour show. Everybody would get drunk. They would talk about more risque subjects. They would do some truth or dare stuff sometimes. They would do some more risque questions to each person on the panel. And if you didn't watch it live, that's it. All you had to do was watch the live stream, and that's the only chance you had to watch it. They didn't save the video online. Either you watched the live stream or you lost out. So everybody kind of talks about these controversies that Clark Wolf has been involved in over the years. Just kind of controversy tends to follow her, whether it's deserved or not. When she was originally on AMC, she famously disagreed with Campea at the time about the quality of the film Man of Steel, and some people will claim that she got let go from AMC because of her disagreement with Campea. It was a big deal at the time. In reality, Campea is not that petty. It was more to do with scheduling. They've both acknowledged it since then. She had some other gigs that conflicted with the times that he needed her for, so it wasn't this big drama about disagreeing with him about Man of Steel. But there's a lot of people that like to comment on this over the years. It's kind of been this thing that's been perpetuated, and it's become kind of an urban legend, so to speak. But along with that has been the after hours controversy, and Kristian referenced the fact that people thought he hated Clark Wolf because of her performance on the After Hours show in 2015. Now, let me explain to you guys what actually happened. Like I said, everybody gets drunk. Everybody's drinking. Well, Clark got a little too drunk. Kristian was a little too drunk as well, but Clark was really showing it. She was talking out of turn a lot. She was interrupting a lot. The show was hard to conduct given how drunk she was. She was talking when Kristian was trying to run the show. She would kind of disappear at times as well. She was really off topic at times. She was loud at times. So it's not any one thing in particular, really. She was just having trouble holding her liquor. She was being very loud, very unclassy Clark Wolf. And that being said, she wasn't being trashy either. She's always classy to an extent. She was just being very loud, very un-Clark Wolf-like. And it's kind of become an inside joke between them. As you can see, no one actually hates each other. But that is why the After Hours show is no more. They will never do it again because it went so bad last year. So it was interesting to see at the time just because I found out some things about certain relationships between people in this space that I won't say here, but people kind of let go because there were less inhibitions with all the alcohol rolling around and the subject matter going around too. So the After Hours show, folks.
Let me just ask, when approximately was this? You said it was a year ago?
It was August of 2015.
Okay, so what I think is silly is that me, someone who did not experience the After Hours show, Clark Wolf has consistently been on Collider Video since I've been watching, which is as long or longer than that period of time. So I don't know why people would still think that Clark is hated by Kristian when it was Kristian, the director of development, who put in Collider Nightmares. And even before that, she was consistently involved on Movie Talk around once a week or once every couple of weeks. So I'm not sure why people still had that in their heads when this entire time she had been around and had been speaking to Kristian plenty, especially with the Schmoedown.
Well, John as well.
Exactly.
John as well.
So I don't know why people would still...
John brought her back before he left, and she's been a mainstay. But yeah, people like to carry on the After Hours drama, especially since they no longer do the After Hours show. So you know how these things don't die. There are certain things with Kristian and Miri that some people just won't let them die.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm over that kind of silly stuff. Like, I'm glad that you're telling me about it, but I don't know why people would still be talking about it. So, or still think that they dislike each other.
I mean, certain questions she was not answering exactly. She was kind of off topic a lot. It wasn't that big a deal, but at the time it probably seemed like a bigger deal than it is now in hindsight. But no one ever hated anybody. And like I said, Clark is so good now at all this stuff. She's so good. She's improved so much. And I gotta say, she absolutely crushed this week's co-host gig on the Schmoes Know show. She crushed.
She really did, honestly. And I don't know, did Kristian actually say or throw out that she's going to be a consistent addition to the Schmoes Know show, or was just like a one-time thing? I don't remember.
He did not say what the status would be moving forward. It was just for this week as of this show, but I would absolutely be more than happy seeing her 2 to 3 times per month. I mean, who knows if she even wants to do it that many times, but I would love to see her on a regular basis, at least once a month, 2 if we're lucky.
I agree. I think that the main reason why she was there, though, was to promote Nightmares. And they actually got in a decent little plug for the show, and they were talking about it. And they really don't spend a lot of time on the live show discussing specific shows like that on Collider, aside from the Schmoedown, of course. And it was interesting because it was just, last week we were talking about Riley's concern that Nightmares wasn't doing so hot on the channel. So there was, I think that specific reason was why she was there. I found it funny that they never did that for the top 10 show, by the way. Like, you think about how little Rocha is actually on the live show. And if they wanted to, they could have given them.
Has he been on in Phase
I don't
6?
think so. I don't recall it. Maybe just for a split second. If he wasn't a huge. But I don't think Nost was on it either. Maybe they were during the Collider announcement. I can't recall. But it wasn't a big thing. But which is interesting. That's a whole other conversation. Why Rocha is like the one that's glaringly absent from the live show. But I just find it interesting that they didn't give that opportunity to top 10 if they could have.
You are really worried about nightmares, it sounds like. You've been paranoid about nightmares this whole episode.
I'm not necessarily paranoid. I think that they're actively trying to grow it, and I think it was a good move that they did. I mean, I'm not shaking in my boots, but when you have two shows like that, again, where this is just speculation, where it seems like Nightmares is the one that isn't performing as highly as the other genre shows, and the fact that top 10 was just underneath it and then got the boot. I mean, it's, in my opinion, not that it's obvious, but
Nightmares has double top 10's audience. Top 10 was down to 20,000. Nightmares is consistently at least 40, usually 50, with breakout episodes that get really high. So let's not say it's anywhere near the dire straits that top 10 was in. But yeah, it could be doing better.
Well, I'm just saying it was next up in line. Like when you look at least watched shows, top 10, and then Nightmares is right above it. So
do we count Mailbag in this equation?
No, no, we do not.
We're blowing holes in each other's arguments.
But anyway, I just found that interesting. But again, like you said, not that Clark isn't there to be a great presence in general, and obviously she can contribute to everything else that they're talking about on the show, including Schmoes Choice. But anyway, yeah, there's no doubt that Clark will fit in whether she has a show to promote or not. I mean, that's not what I was arguing, but I don't know.
I like that Kid Kristian asked her about what she thinks of the Schmoedown, and she expanded on that anxiety that she's hinted at before.
Yeah.
And so I like that we kind of got further expansion on that. It seemed like they were specifically targeting that question because you and I have talked about that a lot and whether she's going to remain doing the Schmoedown, at least in singles format, because of how anxious it makes her. But it sounds like she's here to stay, yeah. Whether it's singles and tag team. Tag team for sure, but singles, I think she likes, but it does take its toll. I mean,
I loved how...
I don't know. It was tough to read.
I loved how her quote contrast Rocha's entire shtick, which Clark was dead serious and was just like, the thing that she doesn't care for about the Schmoedown is that there's no way to prepare. And that goes, and Rocha's whole thing is that he's been training for this his whole life. But she said something else, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing, but she said during the match, you can tell when you're out there to dry. And you know in the match, or you have a feeling in the match that you've already lost. So, or at least she feels that way because of the anxiety. So I thought that was some interesting dialogue on the Schmoedown.
And she's not just important to Nightmares. She's not just important to these channels. She's important to the Schmoedown because she's one of the few women that participates in the Schmoedown. We've got Gray Drake, now we've got 6 Degrees, but Clark has been the female representation for the most part for the Schmoedown so far. Sasha is going to play Kara Warner coming up in a match, which we didn't talk about earlier, but SPR is playing Kara, and then we've got Matt Nost playing Drew McQueenie, formerly of Hitfix. So we've got some new people coming in, but previously, Clark was the female face of what the Schmoedown is all about.
Definitely. So this week we also got some follow-up, we got the Cobster promotion. This week they actually talked about the fact that Ace took Cobster's place as associate producer. So congratulations to Ace. I was glad that you got in there and were mentioned. And then we got an intro to the brand new intern. And I want to know what you think about this, Brian. There's a new Brian in town. Brian Perez, who does the sound for the Wanger Show. He is now the new intern. Congratulations, Brian. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
First off, there are too many Brians. Too many Brians. There's Brian Harloff. There's Brian Davids. There's Brian Perez. There's way too many Brians. So in true Schmoes Know format, in relation to Howard Stern as well, we need a nickname for Brian Perez. BPI, BTI, Brian the intern, whatever, BTI, BPI, you could call him Fedora. Fedora seemed to kind of catch on for a little bit, even though they were talking about someone else. It just happened to get attached to him somehow. So let's get Brian Perez a nickname, because he cannot be the first intern without a nickname. Every intern has had a nickname. We got to give him something. So figure it out, people. Give Kid Kristian some suggestions.
I find it hilarious that you think Brian Harloff has such a strong presence that's why Perez needs a nickname.
I'm just trying to make my point that we need to avoid any Brian confusion. And plus, like I said, every intern deserves a nickname. Every intern has gotten a nickname, and we cannot break tradition. Now, let me ask you, what'd you think of the Mark Ellis Stoneface bit? Because he was not here last week for the debut of the RB3 cam. What did you think of Mark Ellis's twist with the Stoneface RB3 cam bit?
It was hilarious. And that was one way to keep that little, I don't know if you'd call it segment, but to keep that joke running and staying fresh. It was great that Ellis interjected that a little bit. And I think that just tells us that Ellis had just as much fun with it, watching it from home, as we did. And I was excited. I'm excited to see it back every week, but I thought it was hilarious. And there was no way in hell that I ever thought that he could do it. Right? I mean, the idea behind the RB3 laugh cam is because he is so obnoxious and finds the littlest thing so funny. There's no way he can keep a straight face. And that little bit that he did when Ellis called him out, it was more than I thought he could do, but I knew that he would eventually break. But it was really funny.
I just thought of a brilliant idea, but I'm going to put that on hold for a second and talk about the key to the RB3 cam. I just realized this week. Maybe I realized it last week, but the key to the RB3 cam is the chair. The chair is so loose and it rocks back and forth as he's laughing that the chair adds so much physical comedy, and that sells the bit so much. Not just the laughing part of it, not just the awesome graphic that they put in the corner. The chair is so key to that, and it's such a subtle detail that some people might overlook.
There will be a day when RB3 takes advantage of that, and instead he's either missing from the chair. I'm waiting for those jokes where the camera will cut to him and he's actually just missing from the chair, or he
falls over.
He falls over. There's something in his place. He's just flipping off the camera, or maybe he's
Finstock.
Oh my God, that'd be great.
Finstock.
Yes, that's a great idea. Finstock taking over the RB3 cam. I mean, the possibilities are endless for that. Okay. So that's going to make that a whole lot more fun. And thank God we have Ken Napzok as writer now, and he can maybe interject some fun stuff with that as well.
I had a brilliant idea that I want to mention before I forget.
Okay.
I've been complaining for a while that I hate when Mark Ellis misses shows because he misses iconic moments like the RB3 cam being introduced last week. I want to see reaction videos, live reaction videos that we can watch whenever we want, of Mark Ellis watching the Schmoes Know show from his hotel room in some obscure motel, wherever he is doing the yucks, wherever he is on a stand-up tour. I want to be able to watch his reaction to the show that he missed, so I can kind of understand what his reaction would have been had he been in town. I don't care about his reaction to the, whatever trailer. I don't care about his reaction to the Ouija trailer. I don't care about his reaction to a Monster Calls trailer. I want to see his reaction to the shows that he's missing, so I can understand what it was like for him to witness the RB3 cam for the first time.
Would you watch the full 2-hour cut of Ellis's reaction?
Hell yeah, I would. I would watch the extended Ultimate Edition. It's brilliant, right?
I'm a little surprised that Ellis didn't have any commentary as to what went down with us and Riley and Makuga.
After 5,000 viewers plus in 5 days, you would think that they would give us a little pat on the back, acknowledge some of the great bits that we had last week. But I guess we got one pot shot with Collider Nightmares and how we don't watch it, and that's it. So
I'm fine. The attention was on Clark Wolf, and I understand people want to hear Clark Wolf over talk about us.
Maybe we got to get 10,000 viewers to get some attention on the show. But because we do this for attention. That's all we do this for.
Absolutely.
It's not because we like these programs or these people.
Speaking of attention, Brett was back to do another stellar review of Prisoners, and I really miss the good review that he had. What was it, Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl that he did so well that week?
That's his best one, in my opinion.
I miss the good reviews. Like, he can be funny, that's fine, but I don't know. This one was just kind of lackluster. I was a little bit distracted trying to figure out what his hair reminded me of, and I realized that he has the same hairstyle as Jimmy Neutron.
I'll pretend to know who that is.
Oh, I forgot. You're like 7 years older than me.
I forgot you're 19 years old.
That's right. But Ellis again with the joke came in, and I cracked up hysterically at the Oshkosh Bagosh bloody overalls rating system. That was great. I think it's hilarious. I think it's hilarious that rating system continues to change every week. That was funny.
Kristian blasted a tweeter. He previewed this blast on Jedi Council, but he brought it to begin this episode. He went off on this tweeter. And Kristian, since I said that Phase 3's energy cannot be brought back in the Collider studio, Kristian is doing his best to prove me wrong. And I'm glad I said this, because the reverse psychology is working out exactly like I knew it would. So Kristian has made a point the last couple episodes to really work himself up to start. He's really trying to capture that Phase 3 magic all over again. He's trying to capture 1995 Howard Stern, only in this case 2012 Kristian Harloff. He's bringing it. He's sipping on some kind of drink. He's eating right before the show. Two Finger Toots. This was a classic outburst. Two Finger Toots is going to be on a shirt.
He asked for it.
Oh, did he?
Right afterwards, he went to the Facebook group right afterwards and asked for someone to make that shirt.
See, I'm not on Facebook, but I knew that he was going to have that made into a shirt right away, just like shave your head and go to sleep. So, what do you think of Kristian's newfound energy, and is he trying to prove me wrong that Phase 3 cannot be recaptured given the studio setup?
I don't know if it's necessarily that he's trying to prove you wrong, but sort of like with...
It's all about me.
It's sort of like with this show. When we get criticisms and the comments about things, more than likely, me and you already know our own their criticisms before they do. So when I finish an episode and I'm editing, I'm the first person to judge the episode, and it has to be that way for Kristian. As soon as those cameras are off, he doesn't have to listen to the chat or check Schmoeville right away. He knows what he didn't like and what doesn't work. So I think along the way, he realized that, hey, I need to step it up. And I don't know if it reminds me of Space Jam, where Bugs Bunny gives Michael Jordan the bottle of secret stuff. So I think maybe Kristian borrowed some of Campia's Citrus Siesta, and he was just rejuvenated. And I've noticed it. We talked about it before on the show, how he is bonkers the second that camera hits play. And someone even posted in Schmoeville again, Mick, I believe it's his name, brought up how he could tell that Kristian had changed. I mean, it is so obvious, and no one's complaining. No one's complaining. We loved it. We are so happy that he feels this way about the show. And I'm not even saying that, like, I'm not going to pretend that I called it, because I never thought, well, there weren't weeks where I was talking about Kristian being lazy or feeling like he didn't want to be there. I mean, we talked about that instance with Sasha before, and, but now in retrospect, I can see where he wasn't as excited as he is now. So I'm very thankful. I'm glad he feels great about this show. Someone was talking about how it's this new diet of his that he's been on, but it's noticeable.
I think we're helping too. I think the presence of the Schmoeville podcast is giving them a reason to to step up their game a little bit because they know that we're going to kind of call them on that in the nicest of ways.
Yeah.
So I think part of us has something to do with it. There are other factors too, of course. But go back and watch those Phase 3 shows, folks, because those shows are just quick and snappy, and Kristian is just in a whole different zone. And I love seeing flashes of Phase 3 Kristian Harloff every now and again, like we had the last couple weeks. And I can't believe someone tried to tell him what he can and can't tweet about on his own Twitter feed. And clearly this person is unaware that TweetDeck exists so that you can specifically exclude certain tweets that are about certain subjects that you do not want to hear about. So this guy could have still followed Kristian Harloff and excluded the Schmoedown from his tweets and been fine. You can dictate what Twitter serves you without having to unfollow somebody. So you can't tell people what they can and can't tweet about, but you can tell technology what it can serve you. So let your technology work for you, people.
That's what I was going to say. It's not just stupid because it happened to Kristian. It's a stupid thing to say to anyone. It reminds me of people who don't like that I tweet about politics. But why would anyone, you have the ability to unfollow. Like, you were the one that decided to follow. You can unfollow. It's simple as that. So that's the thing. I'm fine with Kristian calling out, but he didn't name him by name. He did it on the show, and yeah, I'm fine with that being done that way. And again, Two Finger Toots was a hilarious running joke. Died laughing every time he said it. I love when Kristian does any kind of voice like that anyway. So, but yeah,
it's a podcast about a podcast.
Overall, this episode was very good. I mean, these last few episodes, again, they've been so full of energy, so much fun. Great job to all the people behind the scenes as well. Copster. Even though Kristian said that your notes were bullshit, I'm sure I would have loved them, Copster. Don't worry. And you know, I love Schmoes Choice. That was something that was new to me a couple of weeks back, so I was glad to see it here again. That was a lot of fun, so great show.
Ellis had a passing comment by process of elimination in regards to Copster's promotion, in regards to Ace's promotion. Again, I love the little subtle jokes that Ellis sneaks in there with people not really paying attention to them that much. There were some great moments with Little Evil in this episode, especially with Brett sitting to the right of him. They need to put Brett and Little Evil at the same table more often because Brett kept imitating Little Evil's hand gestures and the way that he folds his arms and straightens his arms as he talks.
I agree with that. Like, just put Brett in a corner, let him comment a little bit because he's not really saying anything else during the show. But I love the fact that he needs to feel like he's a part of it. What do you think about the fact that Kristian kind of threw this out a little bit? What do you think about the fact that Brett is trying to become more of a movie buff?
Yeah.
He's considering, or he has been reading more blogs. Do you like that for Brett Sheridan, or do we want to keep him stupid for the sake of the Schmoes Know show?
Look, he's on a show that has a big following. It's important that he knows his stuff. And as long as he still keeps himself blind to the movies that he's reviewing, I'm totally cool with it. But we're kind of jumping all around here. Little Evil was asked, what do you think of the Cody Miller match supposedly being fixed? They asked Little Evil what he thought. And Little Evil, as you would expect, said, as a man of the people, I'm going to let the people speak for me. And this reminded me of our interview with him when we asked him, what do you think of this 30 for 30 trailer, this JTE special? What do you think of all this? And he kind of had a similar answer for us where he said, I'm going to let my words speak for me when the special debuts. So once again, Little Evil continues to be Little Evil. You know, I keep telling him you would change your luck, you would change your karma if you drop the shtick. And instead, he's doubling down on it.
The funniest thing about JT in this episode was his reaction to Ken joining Collider. Because not only did Kristian not really make a big deal about JTE's reaction, because you think that'd be like the first person he'd go to.
Yeah.
Like, JTE, what do you think of Ken joining Collider and leaving Screen Junkies? JTE, I think, was the last person to get a word in, and he didn't really say much at all. But if you go back and watch the tape, he looks miserable.
Yeah.
He looks miserable. He's the only one in the room that is no longer a part of, well, he's not in the Collider family in the sense that everyone else is.
I totally noticed that. He looks so depressed. I mean, plus Ken drives him to work. And you and I the other night, we were joking. We were joking that JTE would have to take the bus to work, and we photoshopped his face onto a passenger in the movie Speed. We took an image from Speed, the bus on Speed. We put his face on one of the people that were sitting on the bus, and we sent that to Ken. We sent that to JTE, and then the very next night, JTE tweets a photo from the LA bus, from the LA Metro. So our joke was actually reality for JTE, with Ken no longer at Screen Junkies.
Poor JT. I feel so bad for him. Do you think he'll make a comeback, or do you think he's going to stay at Screen Junkies?
I think he'll stay there. But Kristian made a great point as far as why would I fix this? Hasn't JTE been beaten down enough by life? Why would I fix this against him? Why would I give him the biggest choke in Schmoedown history? He's been beaten.
Right.
He's been beaten down enough by life as itself.
Very good point. Very good point. I want to finish the discussion of the Schmoes Know live show with the actual moment of the Ken Napzok reveal. Because at the top of the show, we talked about like what it might mean for Collider, but I want to talk about the execution, what exactly went down and how we reacted to the news right then and there. So we pretty much had the idea. I think everyone did. People in the Schmoeville Facebook group, just because it was a little tidbit snuck out earlier this week, because there was a tweet from Andy Signor, I believe, and a conversation between him and Napzok that he was leaving Screen Junkies, and the cat was sort of out of the bag a couple of days before the actual live show, so people were anticipating this news.
Yeah, they were eating cake at Screen Junkies, celebrating his goodbye. I mean, it was quite obvious that he was leaving.
Yeah.
But it was not clear to some people, though, that what Ken was going to be doing next, because for some people, they feel like Ken never left because he's still been on the show all of this time. Not a lot of people figured out that Collider would have a need for him. It's not really the first thing you think of as far as, oh yeah, Ken would work at Collider. Some people think of, Movie Talk or Jedi Council, but people don't seem to realize that there's a whole other side to Collider, like the writing, that would be perfect for the Pitboss. Some people are surprised, is my point. I wasn't. You weren't, but...
Right. What did you think about the execution, though? Did you think it was weird that they cut to like a pre-taped portion of it all?
They've done this a couple times before, and they've done it in Phase 6 before. Don't ask me the specific examples, but it is a little strange. But I understand why they had to do it, because Dennis and John, etc. But what stuck out to me was the fact that Campea, who is supposed to be the Movie Talk showrunner, he still gives off the impression that he is the one running things at Collider. Dennis is supposed to be the one running Collider, and yet Campea seemed like he was the one in charge of this decision to bring Ken on. Obviously, my boy Mark Fernandez had a big part in that, given the wish that I put out in the universe a couple weeks ago. But Campea really took the lead on this. Did you get that impression as well?
Right away. I wrote down in my notes, why is Campea talking over Dennis? It was so obvious, and I don't know if he just had a little bit too much citrus siesta that day, but to go back on what I said a second ago, though, like, I know that the reason why they pre-taped it is because they were at Doctor Strange premiere, but I don't know, if Campea was the one that was doing all the talking, and we're sitting here thinking, why? I mean, why not just make the announcement on the live show with Kristian and Mark, really? I mean,
yeah.
They pretty much did it anyway, because Kristian ended up repeating some things that were said on the video. So I thought it was strange. I guess it's not the biggest deal in the world, but I did think it was a little bit weird. But
it wasn't ideal, obviously, and I'm sure Kristian knew it wasn't ideal. But these guys wanted to have a say in it because he was joining the Collider team. They made mention that Jeremy was also joining officially in early November. That's when he was starting. So it was a way to kind of get that news out. And basically, they are building a dream team. They are building a dream team of movie talk talent, of just entertainment news talent in general.
Right. And to speak on that point, when Kristian and Riley and Ellis and Napzok were sharing that moment, I was listening to them just be really real and raw for a second. Like, they were talking about what this meant to their lives, not just to Collider and Schmoes. And seeing Ken cry, tears, I teared up. I'm not gonna lie. I felt how important it was to them as people to be working together as well. And it was just a really powerful moment, that coupled with the fact that it is happy news, because we all love Ken Napzok. Who doesn't love Ken Napzok? I mean, it was one of the most emotional. This was far more emotional than Miri leaving, at least for me anyway. Definitely the emotional highlight of Phase 6, I think.
But I did not know that Ken was almost about to move back home to Pismo Beach. I did not know that. And that was a week before Andy Signor called with the producer gig at Screen Junkie. So after all these years, these guys have been fighting the good fight to make it in stand-up comedy, to make it in all these different arenas. And Ken almost gave up the fight. And then Andy Signor called. And thanks to Andy, it gave Ken a chance to refine his skill in this specific space. And now Collider is going to get a guy that is fully refined in production when it comes to YouTube programming and YouTube entertainment. So it's such a special thing to be able to get all these guys under one roof in their primes with so much good stuff to come. Jeremy's jumping on board, which is amazing and unprecedented. I mean, the only thing that I think of as kind of a negative, and I hate to bring it up, is the fact that they don't have enough women on staff. We've got all these great men on staff, this dream team of guys, but they do not have enough of a female presence. And I hate to rain on the parade, but other people are saying it too. We've got to get another all-star in there. That's a female, that's a woman. And that is why I keep saying Clark Wolf is so important, because the staff keeps growing, but it keeps growing as far as males are concerned.
But the final moment, I'm not going to let you bring me down, Brian. Why'd I call you Ryan? I'm not gonna let you bring me down, Brian, because it was a great way to end the show.
You're not getting away without Schmoes Choice, so I'm just forewarning you.
Okay, fine. Let's do Schmoes Choice. I gotta get to bed though.
Batman Returns versus Superman 2.
Never seen Superman 2, so I'll go Batman Returns.
I'm gonna go Batman Returns as well. Evil Dead 2 versus Dawn of the Dead.
Haven't seen either of them.
I'm gonna go Evil Dead 2.
I promise I'm not just saying that to make this move along. I truly have not seen those movies.
Spider-Man 2, Winter Soldier.
I think I don't think it's as easy as everyone said it was on the show, but I think that also I love the Winter Soldier. The one I could have forever though. See, the Winter Soldier is special because you see how it is in the MCU. You don't have that with Spider-Man 2. I'm going to go with... I'm going to go with Spider-Man 2 only because I think that's the best of its trilogy. And I don't think Winter Soldier is the best of its trilogy. So if I take Winter Soldier out of the equation, I still have Civil War. And maybe I might regret that way of thinking in like an hour, but that's where I am right now.
Spider-Man 2 is the best Spider-Man movie that is currently in existence. Obviously, that could change with Homecoming. But I, too, would pick Spider-Man 2 just because Civil War is better than Winter Soldier, in my opinion. And even with Civil War, we still got First Avenger if we want more Bucky and Steve relationship stuff. So I can live without Winter Soldier. I wasn't the biggest fan of Winter Soldier, unlike most people. I wasn't crazy about it. I really wasn't. So I much preferred Civil War. and I can easily live without Winter Soldier, but I cannot live without the best Spider-Man movie that is currently in existence. And I once took Tobey Maguire all in at the Mirage Poker Room and won $2,500, but that's a story for another time. Return of the Jedi versus Return of the King.
I think this is the most difficult one of the entire group, without a question. I think in a way you're wrong no matter what you choose. But if I absolutely had to pick, I'm a bigger Star Wars fan than I am of Lord of the Rings. And okay, you can talk about the dance sequence at the beginning of Jabba the Hutt, which I hate. I hate it. The Ewoks are okay, not the big of a deal, but along with the Ewoks, you still have the great stuff between Luke and Vader and the Emperor. And I mean, that's the conclusion of that entire trilogy. And I know you can say that about Return of the King, but I'm just going to circle back because basically that little stuff in Return of the Jedi is not enough to affect what it means overall. And I like that trilogy better, so I have to keep Return of the Jedi.
I was on tour with my band in Odessa, Texas. I saw Return of the King at midnight. And it was like 3:30 in the morning, and we kept getting ending after ending after ending to the point where we all just wanted to leave because it was so late, it was so early in the morning, and the movie kept going. And so I've got all these negative feelings for Return of the King because I saw it so late, and it just is, I was in a bad place at the time. When you're on tour, you never know. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's really bad. But Vader's Redemption, I cannot throw that away for Return of the King. No way.
Good.
Gotta keep Jedi.
Good.
Temple of Doom, Back to the Future 2.
Temple of Doom. I think that Back to the Future, I'm only really a fan of the first Back to the Future. I love all of the Indiana Jones movies. Temple of Doom is the lesser of that trilogy, but I would rather watch it over Back to the Future 2. So.
Oddly enough, growing up, these two were my favorites of their respective series, of their respective franchises. As I became an adult, obviously that changed. However, Back to the Future 2 was my favorite movie as a kid. So I cannot throw that away, especially when the 2015 stuff is unforgettable. It's too important to pop culture. And as a giant time travel nut, I gotta have future Marty interacting with Marty's timeline that he created in 1955. The way the two movies come together with two different timelines is just amazing to me. So I go Back to the Future 2.
Okay, well, there you have it. Is that the end of Schmoes Choice?
That's the end of Schmoes Choice. Let's address sequels better than the first real quick. Which one do you think is the best sequel versus the original? They talked about a bunch. Terminator 2, Aliens, Empire, Spider-Man 2, Winter Soldier, Godfather 2, The Dark Knight. Chris Woodburn, friend of the show, really big, really great fan of ours, was going crazy over The Dark Knight not being brought up in this discussion. So which film are you going to go on record as saying is the best sequel, in your opinion?
The Bourne Supremacy.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that.
I think that is one of the greatest sequels ever made. The fact that the first movie is so good, and the fact that you take it a new direction, you implement a new director, and you make that sequel stand out completely, but also improve on the already great film. I mean, that entire trilogy, I think, is the greatest trilogy of all time, because it's the only trilogy, up until the recent Captain America, that progresses in quality, in my opinion. There's no other trilogy that you can name that does that, in my opinion. So even classic trilogies don't do that. They always fall apart in the third movie or whatever, so that automatically ruins that. So, but the Bourne Supremacy is one of the greatest sequels ever. And it really, really bothered me when Ellis said that the Bourne movies blend together, because I could not disagree anymore, because I think that identity and supremacy are so glaringly different. Anyway, I was very upset that that didn't get the representation that it deserves on the show.
Brett made a great point how if we're arguing over 2 consecutive films from the same filmmaker like James Cameron with Terminator and Terminator 2, if we're arguing how they're both good despite one having no budget and the other having a much bigger budget, that's a testament to great filmmaking. I thought that was a wonderful point by Brett, and I can see why Kristian was so high on him having a career in this business. But as far as my sequel, I'm going to go with The Dark Knight just because it wasn't mentioned. And if someone said to you that they're going to make Heat, they're going to make a Michael Mann type film, they're basically going to remake Heat, only in place of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, you're going to have Batman and the Joker. If someone said to you they're going to do that and it's going to work, and it's going to work extremely well, I mean, that's just invaluable. You wouldn't believe them, first off, that they could pull it off, and yet to pull it off as well as Nolan did, that's a special kind of filmmaker. And I love Batman Begins. I love Christopher Nolan. I love Christian Bale. It was my combination of my 2 favorites at the time. I loved them before everybody else loved them. And yet, The Dark Knight, it's just one of the greatest films of all time, not just greatest comic book films. So, Chris Woodburn, you're welcome.
Whenever they ask those type of questions on the live show, I don't want them to respond with the obvious ones. So that's why I was angry that they weren't saying Born Supremacy, and I don't need to hear them talk about how great of a sequel Terminator 2 is for the 100th time. So that's why when I hear those questions, I try not to go with the obvious choice, and I try to pick something that deserves to be talked about that isn't. So not that they do that every time, but I don't need to hear how much better Aliens is than Alien.
I mean, they tried to keep it kind of obscure with like Hellboy 2, Young Guns 2. I love Young Guns 2, by the way. Wayne's World 2, but then eventually they found their way over to Godfather 2, etc. And so Dark Knight has to be mentioned, though. It just has to be mentioned. So,
man, what a great week. Again, at the top of the show, what did I say? I thought this was going to be a short episode, and it's, I think, our longest yet. So, anyway, hopefully you guys enjoy it. Hopefully we hear from you in the comments yet again to keep us entertained throughout the week. I'm just kidding. You're more valuable than you know, and we greatly appreciate that. If you don't know, you're watching us on the YouTube channel, just know that we're on the Schmoes Know podcast feed on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're listening to us there, also know we're on the YouTube channel, and that's where we like to talk to you guys in the comments section. So, with that said, Brian Davids, where can the people find you?
You guys can follow me, Brian Davids, on Twitter at BDF331. Check out my film and TV podcast, Film Schlubs, wherever podcasts are found, as well as at filmschlubspodcast.com. I also interview great people in the business. I want to give a shout out to listener Derek Spicer, who left us a great comment on this week's episode. I also want to give a shout out to M. Lynn Field for her great comment as well. And a great shout out to Kenny Napzok for a great new segment, specifically the Jared Leto stuffing German kids into tubes full of chocolate, as well as his great point about sexism and ageism in Hollywood, as well as the Ruby Rose line. That is it for me.
Thank you very much, Brian. You can find me on Twitter at WhatUpSnell and check out my new music, movies, and TV podcast called Sight and Sound. We're in the middle of doing some giveaways. You can rate and review our podcast on iTunes and enter yourself in to win a Schmoes Know shirt of your choice. We're really pushing those ratings and reviews. It'd be nice to hear from you guys. Also, like us on Facebook, facebook.com/sightsoundpod, and that'll enter yourself in to win a Star Trek Beyond Blu-ray. And you can follow me on Twitter for all those updates on that podcast as well. So thank you so much, guys. Until next week, I'm Ryan Snelling.
And I'm Brian Davids.
We'll see you next week on Schmoeville.